There we go.
Do I look as shocked to be on screen as I hoped?
What are we doing back? It's a Monday.
What, the Monday?
Somebody's got a case of the Mondays.
I do have to say that, like, recording a pop culture coffee hour on a Monday did in fact kind of throw me for a loop existentially. I was like, I don't even know what's real anymore.
I don't even want to be around anymore.
Yes. For those of you who are tuning in, you will know that we have a standing time in which we record Pop Culture Coffee Hour, which we will also do this week. Which is lucky you in out there in lucky world, lucky land.
The metaverse. Too soon?
You haven't even seen it yet, so it's
you don't even know.
You don't even know what you're talking about. But it's really good.
Oh, I was making a Facebook reference, not a MCU. Although I am going tonight.
Although, as someone who's not on the Facebooks, I don't know what that reference is.
Oh, you're a blessed man. Blessed are those who don't know what Facebook is up to.
Yeah, no, I actively rejected it, and I continue to actively reject it, as well as participation in all spheres of social media, with the exception of having a YouTube channel.
Well,
and promoting everything that I think in real time
into the metaverse.
Yeah, where it will stay for all eternity.
Yeah. Well, pardon me while I just kind of set things up. I'm putting all the links and the whatnots up.
Would anybody like me to tell some jokes? I can tell some jokes while we wait.
No. So what this is, right, is we're back to talk more about Mars Hill, as you can see from the thumbnail. This is not a new episode. We were just talking about this before we went live. It's not a new episode. It's a continuation of episode 177. So this is just episode 177, part 2. We're back for more.
Part due, you might even say.
Yes. Paging Charlie Sheen from circa
Dude,
1998.
I'm so glad that you were right there with me. Yes. Let us shoot roosters from our bows.
Doesn't
that happen? Does that happen at one point where he shoots a rooster out of a... Yeah, right?
He definitely does.
Yeah.
Why? Who knows?
Because tiger blood.
It's tiger blood.
Listen, all I do is win. Okay?
Oh, Lord have mercy. Mm-hmm. Lord have all of the mercies. So we're back with part 2 of episode 177. We are doing another full episode on Wednesday. Like Christian said, we're going to be back talking about the new Spider-Man movie on Wednesday. That'll be a normal full episode with our normal sort of follow-ups and all that, but we're just going to get into it because this is just a continuation of the episode. So where did we leave off? Where do we pick up as we're doing this?
Yeah. So, one of the things I think that we really want to, and by the way, if you haven't listened to part 1 of the Mars Hill podcast, you probably our Rise and Fall of Mars Hill talk about time. Go back and listen to that first, and then maybe this one will, pick up kind of with some thoughts or questions maybe that you hungry vultures have been eager for us to talk about.
Maybe that's the spoiler porg for this episode. Yeah, don't listen until you've listened to episode 1.
Yes, the spoiler porg is for our own podcast. Finally, we have made it into the imminent domain of pop culture. We did it. We are spoiler porging ourselves.
It only took 177 and a half episodes.
We did it. Yeah. I'm so proud of us. But yeah, I think one of the big things I think we talked about last time was just this idea of authority and what it means kind of from like the top down or inside out. I mean, we kind of talked about a lot of different ways of understanding authority and hierarchy and all that kind of stuff within the Orthodox mind. But maybe because this is one thing that was brought up to some comments to us was just about like, what's the question of what does it mean to be a lay person under authority? So we maybe kind of want to start this with a little bit of reflection on what's the other side of authority. And I think we did kind of try to talk about it throughout the course of all of this stuff with how Driscoll really leveraged his power and all of that kind of stuff. And some of the things that like St. Basil had to say about how lay people should be able to kind of feel free to hold their leaders accountable to the teachings of the scriptures and such things as this. But there maybe was this lingering question that some people were hearing in terms of how then do we as lay people, or maybe perhaps more rightly said, how do we as the unordained respond rightly to church leadership? Which I do think is a really good question and an important one. So maybe we can just pick up from there.
Yeah, that I think is a really important question, and maybe to sort of like, as we start thinking about the contours of this, right? One thing to say is that I think sometimes this is one of those areas where we can't sort of like immanentize the church. Just like I think sometimes the hierarchy of the church, we kind of think about it in corporate sort of structures, right? We think about like our bishop as being like the CEO and the presbyters as being regional managers. Like we kind of like, we immanentize this sacred order of the church. We also can't kind of immanentize our role as the unordained laity, right? And I think sometimes maybe like one of the comments that we got, which was a really good one, is that there's sometimes sort of a spirit of revolution that's in the air, right? And kind of like a pushing back for the sake of pushing back, or a pushing back kind of, with no sense of what comes out on the other side, right? That sort of instinct to sort of burn down and not build back up. So, I mean, that this is clearly not what this is, right? Like this is, I think it's about understanding things theologically, understanding things from a Christian sense. And just like we can't understand hierarchy in a purely corporate way, I think we can't understand the laity in some sort of like, I don't know, purely political way. Because the thing is, like, our lives, even as unordained Christians, like there is sort of a tension between honesty, which is what we were talking about last time, like some of the quotes that we got from St. Basil in terms of the honest feedback that laity offers, the pronouncement of the ordained as worthy by the laity, right? Like there's a particular structure there, but like the laity are part of this larger body of the church, right? Like there is kind of a complementary sort of thing. Like if the church is what we say it is, if it really is this body of which we are all sort of members and we are all kind of like valuable, then there is a place for all of those members. But the place of all of those members is like for the sake of the larger whole, right? Like the hand serves the entire body, the foot serves the entire body. And just like the eye can't say to the hand, I have no need of you, the laity can't say, I have no need of you, X, hierarch that I don't like, or X sort of I don't like, or whatever it is. Like we're still all part of this body, and that creates opportunities for tension, and it creates opportunities for forgiveness. It creates opportunities for love. It creates opportunities for both like the tension between openness and honesty, and where appropriate, like obedience, right? Because there are going to be times where we sort of submit to each other in love, to each other, right? Like this is where that, like complicating that notion of hierarchy as not just a top-down sort of thing, but like a top-down, bottom-up, left-right, diagonal, right? We're all sort of like submitting to each other.
And I think that like to that end, right, one of the things that probably overall for everybody, every person, because as we even talked about last time, I think too, that even those who are ordained clergymen are also members of the laity, right? The people of God, and lead as members of the laity. So we like ordained folks lead from within the body, from among the body, not necessarily as someone above, right? Because what we ultimately need to recognize that for the one body of Christ, there is only one head. There's one head, and that one head is Jesus Christ himself, the high priest. And I think that sometimes we have this tension of putting the cart before the horse, so to speak, and we forget who the true authority of the church really is, right? And like when we see what Christ does with his authority, he says, if you wish to be great, become the least. If you wish to be the leader, become the servant. If you wish to be high, become low. Like there's this constant kind of cruciform reality to authority in Christianity, that the one with true authority is the one who takes up the cross. So I do, and to be clear, I'm talking about Jesus Christ, right? Like he is the one with true and ultimate authority. and he shows us that that authority is ultimately revealed by the way he dies as a human being. And so I think that there is this kind of thing where we need to probably all, whether we're ordained or not, and even that language of ordained is kind of, a little bit touch and go, because we're all ordained in some capacity, right? We've all been ordained as priests of creation and of our lives. So there is this kind of priestly role that even non-clergy lay people have to take up. But if we all are constantly navigating that by checking ourselves and checking what is driving us, and I think this is why, when Jesus begins his earthly ministry, I've recently started taking to the time that Christ spends in the desert and his temptations as the big three. Like I like thinking of those temptations as the big three, right?
Are these the things you put in your full focus planner every morning?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. My number 1 is power. My number 2 is possession. And my number 3 is prestige. If I'm not pursuing one of those 3 things, I'm wrong. Like, that's just kind of how I live my life. Right. But those are the temptations really that Jesus is up against, right? Is power, possession, and prestige. And if those are the things that are driving us, then those things are actually contra the cross. And I mean, you see that evidence, right? Like human weakness perfectly displayed in the cross. He dies naked without even clothes on. He has nothing, and not even friends by him. And he, to be hung on a tree is to be called a curse, so to be despised among men. So he forsakes power, possession, and prestige in the act of the cross. And I think if those are the things that are driving us, then we need to wonder really where our authority is coming from.
Yeah. And here's the thing that I think, even to push into this a little bit more, we stay true, right? I think we are less likely to succumb to some of these temptations, or maybe perhaps we are more likely to bring these temptations honestly up to the surface when they are still in kind of a seedling form. When we are in a healthy community, we are with people to whom we are accountable in some sort of way, and we are with people to whom we are honest in some sort of way. Right. It is when we break down this sort of mutual hierarchy, the ball of yarn sort of hierarchy that we were talking about last time, where everybody in some ways is at the bottom of the hierarchy and at the top of the hierarchy, right? This actual sense of interdependentness, not just kind of this corporate top down where the CEO is untouchable, right? And the middle manager is in his own way untouchable. I mean, a silly example, from real practical life, right? One of the jokes that I have with seminary buddies sometimes is that the only real feedback that a parish priest will get about the quality of his sermon is from his wife, right? A joke that I have with buddies sometimes is at coffee hour, everybody's like, "Father, your sermon was so amazing. Your sermon was so amazing." And then you go home, right? And Presbytera's like, "I mean, that was good. And you probably could have shaved 4 minutes off of it and it would have been even better. Or you could have not said that dumb image, which didn't really help," or whatever it is, right? There has to be a place for honest feedback, actual sort of accountability, which is one of the things that was lacking in Mars Hill, right? Here was a guy who was claiming these spiritual father structures, but anybody who opened their mouth with some sort of feedback, hey, maybe we can do better, was immediately decapitated.
Yeah. Yes. It just now dawned on me, and I mean, I've known this, but I don't know that I necessarily have articulated it in this way, that any kind of checking one another, so to speak, right? It can't be in the sense of retribution,
Sure.
Of kind of getting even or bringing you down because you're bad, but in a spirit of correction and gentleness, right? I'm because God's justice is not retributive, right? It's restorative. That there's this move in God's action to lift up what has fallen, not to destroy the thing that is already down.
Yeah.
So I almost wonder if that's kind of how we need to be thinking about this. When Presbytera comments on Father's homily, it's not for the sake of tearing him a new one or making him feel bad, but for the sake of building him up and helping him be better, right? And and there's a difference, I think, between building somebody up and flattering them, kind of like, oh, Father, you're oh, blah, 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 blah. But there can also be really positive feedback, that's like, the thing that you said about that thing really, really moved me, and I want to hear more of those kinds of things because they help me understand what it means to follow Christ and to take up my cross, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But I think the ultimate question of, maybe how lay people respond and relate to authority is twofold, right? Like, in the question of like, is what this person is doing, the leader that I'm following, is this building me up in Christ, or is it smashing me down, right? Or is it building up others or smashing them down? Dave Chappelle uses that verbiage, right? Like punching down, like, yeah. and I think that, like sometimes there can be like a sort of feeling of being punched down upon, rather than being lifted up. And my thought is maybe that we need to consider kind of how that lifting up is not unilateral but bidirectional, that it's like from the clergy to the unordained laity, and from the laity to the clergy, right? How do we as brothers and sisters build one another up?
Yes.
Which even though some of us bear the title of father. Yeah.
The upbuilding of the church.
Yep.
Right. And this upbuilding is a thing that we all kind of like have a part to play in. I mean, I think that's really important, right? Even the sort of the spirit of critique and the spirit of criticism, because this is something that came out in the podcast, right? That, and this is interesting, right? To get into kind of like the theology of it, even in the later episodes, or just kind of the overall series, people kind of like said that being a member of Mars Hill was not a liberating experience, right? It kind of felt like there was just this like pressure and like this culture that you had to sort of assimilate to, and this like way of thinking and this way of being. And like Mark Driscoll was always there just berating people. Like, do better, do like me, do better. That kind of thing is the way that one person puts it, right?
But a gospel of grace, grace.
Which is, again, the funny sort of contradiction that's at work there, right? But like, if you look in his epistles, right, this was actually the epistle reading 2 or 3 Sundays ago. I'm not exactly remembering where Paul talks about, maybe two Sundays ago, Paul talks about the how the light, right, pushes out the darkness. The light is meant to confront the darkness. But we are also sort of like supposed to be careful the way we have those conversations with people, like to check ourselves lest we fall, right? Because our goal is not to sort of like fall into pride by being the one who sort of corrects and condemns and sort of, because that's a way of falling into pride, right? It is very possible for me to find some moral failing in another person and to express critique, not out of a spirit of gentleness, not out of a spirit of restoration, but out of a spirit of like, aha, got you. Look at me, the moral police, or whatever it is, right? And that's how a lot of the culture of Mars Hill, again, not having ever been there, right? We're both experiencing this like through the podcast and through just what we knew of this over the years. That's what Mars Hill felt like, not a place where people were built up, but a place where people were sort of smashed down and shamed and made to feel less than, for some sort of exploitation. I don't even know exactly at the end of the day. But that's not Christian, right?
I think at the end, like when it's, if we can check the questions of power, possessions, and prestige, that can be a really helpful kind of like framework to lean on.
Yeah.
Like who's benefiting from this? Like that, if we can ask that question for a lot of, I think probably in a lot of different realms of life, right? Like who benefits from this? Is it the guy saying the thing? There might be some questions that I have to follow up from that, like if I were looking at a church community where it was clear that like, someone is benefiting from this, and I don't know that it's the listener, then I think that itself could be a really helpful question to kind of hold in our back pockets. And again, to kind of hold that as a framework, not as like a, everyone is saying how great Father's sermon was, so therefore it was all about prestige. It's like, well, if it was a great sermon, it was a great sermon, but like, did you benefit from it? did you get anything out of it? Which, that whole thing with, it's like Chrysostom, right? Like Chrysostom would give a great homily and people would applaud him, and he was like, that
Yeah. That's not what we're about here.
no,
Yeah.
go do it, right? Like
Yeah.
like don't applaud me because I'm some awesome speaker and you're calling me the golden mouth. Like, there's a part of me that thinks like that he probably would have been like, don't say that.
Yeah.
Like, don't call me the golden mouth. Like, just like go be like golden hearted.
Yeah.
Like that's what I want. That's what I want for all y'all.
Yeah.
And then, eventually it backfired on him and he was definitely not considered the golden mouth. It was like the potty mouth. Let's get him out of here kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
It's always
Funny
in
how things
retrospect that I know. Yeah, it's always in retrospect. But I don't know, man. I think that's a helpful guiding question anyway. Who benefits from this and how?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Which again clarifies, right? And if the question is not all of us, if the question is not the body, as you were saying before, like something is weird, and there always has to be a benefit, right? Like that's the thing. Like it's very interesting to contrast something like Mars Hill with, just to use a different extreme, like a healthy monastic community, right? Because a healthy monastic community does have very clear sort of organizational structure in terms of, this is the abbot and these are the monks who sort of work in the abbot's office and help him, sort of like run the monastery, and this is the monk who feeds the cows and so forth. Like a monastic community is built around obedience, right? Like more strict obedience than any of us live in a particular parish or community. And yet like a healthy monastic community, even though it's about more obedience, even though it's more strict, even though it's more whatever, like is way more healthy than Mars Hill ever was.
Yes.
Because it's not just the
Sorry.
presence of obedience, which is a red flag. It's not just the presence of like hierarchy or structure or clarity of roles or whatever it is. That's a red flag, right? It's like I like that as the framework, right? It's the personal benefit, it's the personal enrichment, it is the abuse at the end of the day. This is another word that came up multiple times in the podcast. The self-centered sort of abuse, rather than like it's for the upbuilding, as Paul says, of the church.
Which exactly, right? Like, I'm even going to just read that portion from Ephesians 4, right? Where Paul's talking about the idea of like different things being given to different people. But he still says that like we are one body, one spirit, as you were called in your callings, one hope, to one Lord, one faith, and one baptism, right? Like this is the idea. And then he goes on saying, he granted it to some to be apostles, and some prophets, and some evangelists, and some shepherds and teachers, for the restoration of the holy ones, for the work of ministry, for the building up of the body of Christ, until all of us come to the unity of faith and to the full knowledge of God's Son, to the perfect man, to the measure of the fullness of Christ, so that we might no longer be infants, wave-tossed and carried about by every wind of teaching, by men's sleight of hand, by villainy attendant upon error's wiliness, but rather, speaking truth in love, we may in all things grow into him who is the head, the Christ.
Yeah.
Like, that's a really powerful thing, that this idea is that all of this, what we as unordained, what the clergy as ordained, all the different gifts that are present in the body of Christ exist for the building up of one another. It's not just the top down, right? It's a, like we as unordained also exist for the blessing of the clergy, to build them up to become Christ as well. And it's not just kind of this like, again, it's not a flow chart, like a flow chart kind of thing, right? But that is the ultimate authority under which we submit, is the one head, Christ. Does this point to the cross? For who is this a benefit to? Is it a benefit for just one person who somehow gains power, possession, or prestige? If so, probably not. Probably not from Christ.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that it would be, but maybe it is. I don't know. I'm just guessing. Probably not.
Well, at the very least, it's a red flag, something to talk about, right? Because even the end point, I think, is just to make it explicit, right? Like, and it's something Paul says elsewhere too. Like, it's about all of us as persons, individual sort of persons, reaching the full stature of the maturity of Christ, right? I mean, this is kind of something we touched on a little bit last time, that like spiritual childhood is supposed to lead us into spiritual adulthood, right? And I think sometimes these unhealthy authority structures kind of trap us at the bottom, right? Like if you use that sort of corporate example, like you're always stuck in the mailroom, right? When it comes to an unhealthy structure, like, or you're propagating abuse, right? And kind of like you're going up the chain of command by actually propagating that abuse.
Yeah.
But like the point is, like, all of us are supposed to like grow into the full stature of Christ. That is the goal for all of us. We're not supposed to be stuck in some sort of, arrested development. We're supposed to grow and flourish and mature. I know. I can't say that phrase without.
You did it last time too. You did that last time as well. I just want to point that out. That in both,
I am rewatching it.
In both parts of the rise and fall of Mars Hill. You're
predictable. Typical.
You're watching that show when you should be fasting.
Yes.
You know there's an Atkins episode where all they do is eat meat.
It's true.
Do you remember one of my favorite lines in that episode, by the way?
Stumbling block.
Is when there's something they're going to watch on television, and Michael says to George Michael, like, well, I'll make some popcorn and we'll watch it. And he's like, but what about Atkins? He goes, oh, I'll fry up some bacon. Do you remember that line? That line is one of the funniest lines to me. Oh, I'll fry up some bacon then. Because they're all doing Atkins. But it's just like in the background of that episode. It's so funny.
That's the stuff. It's those little throwaway lines that sometimes are the biggest nuggets.
The weird moments of family unity that they have, right? Like that the entire Blue family is doing Atkins together. Like,
yeah.
What?
God bless them. They're trying.
Yeah, totally. But I think the thing that you're pointing to, right, is that this idea of growing into not just being stuck as infants, but rather growing into this is what Paul says, to grow into the perfect man, the full stature of Christ, right? Like that's the call, is that is not merely an individualistic call, but is a collective one as well, right? Like that the individual growth is indeed manifest in the way that we gather it as a body.
Yeah.
To recognize our interdependence with one another, our need for apostles, preachers, teachers, evangelists, and etc. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that, the call for unordained lay people in the church in terms of submission to authority is to that. It has to be to that end. It's not just about me taking all of the little like spiritual nuggets that you're telling me and whatever, so that I can be better, me, but so that can bridge itself into a sense of unity with my brother or sister, right? I mean, this is St. John, right? Like if you say you love God and hate your brother, you're a liar.
Yeah.
So there's better work to be done for sure for all of us.
Yeah.
But it's important. Yeah. It's an important question, I think.
Because all of this very like concrete ministry application, I feel like this is actually something that we've seen over the last couple of years as we put out effective Christian ministry, as we brought parishes on to like build this learning community with the cohort and so forth. Like it's actually interesting to see parish communities where one or two people are like, we need to sort of reevaluate our ministries. We can do better. Let's reframe. And a lot of people are just kind of like checked out or don't feel it's their place. And sometimes there's like this very difficult sense of actually assembling kind of a leadership team of people to help reorient the ministries of a parish. Like people either feel excluded or just kind of feel checked out. Finding like the lack of like, I don't know, staff or volunteers or sort of like just kind of like layers of leadership in a community, I think is a very sort of like interesting sign, right? Like when, I don't know, to use kind of a silly youth example, like when a parish wants to do a youth retreat and can't find enough chaperones for it or whatever it is, like that's, I think, a very concrete sign of like this, right? That people are not actually sort of being built up into the leaders that we need them to be.
Yes. Yeah. Cause there's not the sense of the body, right? Like we have the sense of like, how do I become a really good hand?
Yeah.
How do I become a really good foot? Like I'm a foot and I just love being a foot and I want to do more foot things and I'll go to like a foot doctor to become a better foot. But the way you be a better foot is by helping the body walk and balance and stand. And that's what you're for, man. You know, like how do I be a better hand? By feeding the mouth. How do I be a
Yeah.
like that's it's like that's the connection of like if I had just like a really strong, I'm like, look at these hands. These hands are incredible. And if they never do anything for the rest of the body, then they're failing as hands. I will starve.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
like I just like, well, they just got really great hands. I mean, have you seen these? It's like David Duchovny in Zoolander. You know, he's got his hands in like a little in like glass things. He can't do anything for anybody.
Because they're functional on some level.
Can you believe I just pulled that reference out of my mind, by the way?
That I'm impressed. I thought you were going Seinfeld because there's an episode where George Costanza was a hand model for some reason.
Oh.
That's where I thought you were going with this. But
okay, I feel okay referencing these other things because this is technically a pop culture coffee hour episode. So,
oh, totally, of course.
It's like, yeah, we can bring in George Costanza, we can bring in David Duchovny, but not X-Files David Duchovny because aliens are a conspiracy.
That's right. Aluminum
Dude,
foil.
have we ever done an aliens episode?
Yeah, we did one like I think like the third or fourth episode. We did like a zombie episode. We did like an Independence
we did
Day.
Independence Day. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, we don't have to get stuck on aliens.
Yeah. No. So again, like you know, as we see even like ministry gaps in our communities, I feel like this again. It's not to say that like there's like a toxicity in our communities, right? But if we don't have that robust sense of like community culture, like that's something for us to address.
Yeah.
Right. We're all doing our own thing. We're all sort of like, as opposed to like lifting up the body together.
Yeah.
I'll give you like a silly example. Sorry, I keep cutting you off.
No, it's okay. I keep trying to cut you off. So you go.
I'll be the less humble one and just jump in. Like I remember one time I visited a community. I can't remember if it was for a talk or a Be the Bee retreat that we went to. I can't even remember like the name of the community, but like the coffee hour on Sunday, like the volunteers who were there, people were setting up, people were greeting, people were cleaning. Like it felt like going to a family lunch rather than like sort of like just like a community sort of lunch, because there's a different vibe, right? Like when you go to family for Thanksgiving versus when you go to a parish for a Sunday coffee hour. But like this parish like really felt like a family. Like people were getting up and getting each other coffee and like bussing trays for each other and like cleaning up after each other. And it's like, I feel like I'm in somebody's home. And, you know, when you hear the early Christians calling themselves brothers and sisters, like, isn't that kind of the point, right? Like, like this is our body. This is our family, to use even kind of another intimate sort of like word for this. And of course I care what my cousins are up to and my aunts and uncles are up to. Like we're all building up.
What do you, this is just maybe a weird thought.
Okay.
And you can dismiss it immediately and it's fine. But like, you know how we give like the, the presbyter of the community, like we call them father. Like what if we really embrace that kind of familial language and called one another like Brother Steve? Hey, Brother Steve. Like, hey, Sister so-and-so. Like the monastic communities do. I don't know. I mean, like to me, there almost would be like this kind of like, because what we say matters. Like if we had this sense of belonging to one another, even just in the way that we spoke to one another. Once I told Ava, by the way, that she was my sister. Ava is my 6-year-old daughter, for those of you who don't know. And she was like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah, because like we're all brothers and sisters in Christ." And she was like, "But you're my daddy." And I was like, "Well, yeah, in some sense, but technically we all have the same daddy, which is why we pray together every night. Our Father, ours, like he's our Father. And so if we all have the same daddy, what does that make you and me?" And she was like, "Brother and sister," and it blew her mind. I was like, "That's right." Like, but I'm just like, I'm a big brother to you, like I'm a big brother who's trying to show you how to live in our Father's house. And it just like, it broke her brain. And every now and then she reminds me that I'm her brother. And that her friend Lucy is her sister. And she's like, "Lucy's my sister." Like, it's just this incredible, like she gets it. There's some level of just like getting it. From giving that language, that we belong to one another in some way.
It's beautiful, right? Like actually, as you said this, I know somebody who does this. like Bill Marianis, actually, who's got another podcast on Ancient Faith Radio. Like, that's always language that he uses, brother Steve, every time he sees me, right? Like, and I think like I appreciate you saying it out loud, because again, like, this is what the church was, right? I mean, like the ancient pagan Romans actually used to hold it against the Christians. Like, oh, you guys say you're brothers and sisters, but you get married. That's weird, because they were sort of deliberately misunderstanding it. But it's true. And again, what would, like we talked about this last time too, like identity sort of leads into ethics. Like how would our interpersonal reactions be different if we actually started from the posture of like, that's my brother, that's my sister, as opposed to that's just kind of like a stranger, or that's a visitor or whatever, right? Like, that's my brother, that's my sister, right? Like a certain way of life like has to follow from that.
Yes. Yeah. You can't do the individual without the collective in some capacity, right? Because I am not a brother if you're not my sister.
Yeah.
Or if I don't have any other
so,
siblings, right? Like I'm inherently connected to something, somehow, somewhere, rather than just being this kind of like, my name is individual. Yeah. What is your name? My name is also individual. Incredible. Like we just, we need that. I think we do. We need that idea of our belonging to one another.
And it's interesting that like in the story of Mars Hill, right, even though like some of this toxicity was sort of baked in, like there was a time in the series where as Mars Hill becomes bigger, right, and this goes back to that theme of like success outstripping character. I think at one point, actually, like I was reminded of this when I was listening to the Areopagites, and Nicole Rokas did an episode on this recently. They reminded me of this, like that transition when like at some point Mark Driscoll says this is no longer a relational church, because it had gotten to the point where it was so big and so multi-campus, right, that it that sense of brotherhood and sisterhood is strongest.
I lost you a little bit. I don't know if it's on my side or your side, but
no, my computer has been acting. It froze on us last time too. So the for the live stream, I apologize. For the audio, you got it twice now. But this is like there's a point in the Mars Hill podcast where they make this shift to like, we're not a relational church anymore, because it just gets so big and so sprawling that people can't know each other. And like this is why like the home church, in the sense of like the Christian household, and like the home parish are so important, because like that is where we like see people on an ongoing basis. That's where we know people on an ongoing basis. Like it is the altar, right? The altar of our hearts, the altar in our local community, where that real sense of brotherhood and sisterhood can sort of manifest, right? Not in some sort of abstract sense to the person 5,000 miles away, but like the person that I actually sort of see and know in a lived and embodied and regular and ongoing sort of sense, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and that's everything. Yeah, it's just everything. Like that's for Jesus to say, right, like love God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and the second commandment is like it. It's kind of to say like they're in the same. Like if you're not doing one, you can't really do the other. Yeah. And this piece, in my mind anyway, I think becomes kind of a transition to a next item of conversation, because one of the things that Mars Hill became, and actually became sort of its undoing, was it became kind of more and more of this like mega church. Like it kind of, which again, like Mars Hill, when it started, really tried to position itself as like the antidote to, if I can express it this way, like boomer Christianity. And especially early in the series, they talk about like the Crystal Cathedral and these like, the big sort of mega churches that started in the post-war kind of period, right? What it is in the 50s and 60s that the mega churches really sort of began developing, right? These media sort of phenomenons and so forth. As an expression, again, of like boomer Christianity, cultural Christianity, comfortable Christianity. And Mars Hill sort of positioned itself as an antidote against that, right? Like the millennial sort of response to boomer Christianity or whatever it was. But it ended up just kind of creating its own different kind of megachurch, its own sort of like shallow media-centered, communications. And on a deeper sort of level, like propagating some of those like
immanent inspired mistakes, right? And I think it's kind of an interesting thing, because one of the things that we talk about a lot in a variety of topics is, again, like that whole secular 1, 2, 3 thing, and the ways that we are all secular and we have internalized the lessons and the assumptions of immanence. It's interesting to me to see this kind of dynamic that we're breaking against the sort of materialist, consumerist sort of structures of boomerism, boomer Christianity, but all they were doing was propagating them in a different sort of way. And how even like the revolutions and the responses that sometimes happen in Christianity are constrained by the same sort of like flat, narrow understanding, and it's not a response, but is actually like a propagation. Like Mars Hill made the same sort of mistakes that it thought it was responding to, if not worse, right? Because it actually lacked some of the accountability and some of the cultural politeness that might have kept things in check, right? Am I making sense here?
Yeah, no. I mean, so the maybe the best way that I can think about this is like, like when we spend all of our energy kind of thinking about what we're against, we end up spending a lot of time thinking about that thing. Like if I was just like really like anti-pink elephants, I just like, I hate I just can't stand pink elephants. Like pink elephants, there's a reason that we got to do something about the pink elephants, guys. The pink elephants are out there, and
they're a scourge.
They are a scourge, and we need to end them or whatever. It's like, for somebody who hates pink elephants, you sure do talk about them a lot. Like if you're thinking about this thing often, there's got to be some impact of that, right? Like there's got to be some level where you can't quite get away from either the trauma that pink elephants have inflicted upon you, or something. Like think about going on a date with somebody, and if they're just like all they talked about was like their mom, wouldn't you kind of be like,
yeah,
like are you okay?
Or their ex, right? To kind of use like.
Yeah, like man, like I just like that. The last relationship I was in was it's like okay, and I get you don't like them, like maybe we can talk about this relationship, or we can talk about something else, about what your hopes are for the future. It's like, yeah, I just don't want it to be like what it was, It's like, okay, I get that you don't I get that you don't like where you came from. And I sometimes wonder actually, like if we run into a lot of that kind of in like, in Orthodox circles too, like, cause even at beach reads, like when we talk about helping other people pray for one another, like how do you like pray for each other? Like I feel this kind of like tightening, in people of like, but that's so Protestant. And so like there's sometimes this kind of, I'm like, well, and I'll say this, I'll be like, well, why do Protestants get the corner on prayer? Like why are they the only ones that get to pray for one another here, instead of in the privacy of their icon corners, which is usually a place where I go to forget who I said I was going to pray for.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like sincerely.
Honestly.
Yeah. If someone says pray for me, I'm like, yeah. And then it's like gone when I get in the car. Yeah, totally. So when you say, well, why not just do it right now? Like, let's do it right now. If you want me to pray for you, let's do it right now. The reaction to that is like, that's so Protestant. And to me, that almost seems to measure one's anti-Protestantism rather than one's
pro-Christness.
Pro-Christness. Yeah. That's a better way to put it, probably. It's like, so what? Like, I don't know. They're not all wrong.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I don't know. Someone had to say something really good, right? Like,
yeah.
And I think like that kind of language to me just ends up being more divisive than helpful. Because now we're not even coming together as like brothers and sisters and going to like Big Brother Jesus,
Yeah. So this I think is really important. I did a whole podcast with Father Andrew Damick actually on the Amon Sul, and we were talking about, I think we might have talked about this around that point too. We were talking about Saruman, right, in the Lord of the Rings, and how Saruman, if you remember, like he was the head of the White Council, right? He was the wizard that was actually charged with keeping an eye on Sauron. And yet he got so obsessed and focused on studying the dark arts of the enemy that his heart actually sort of began changing over time, right? Like these are the liturgies, right? The liturgies that shape us. And I think like the more that we obsess over the darkness, the more that we focus on the things that we are against, the more that actually in an unintentional way they shape us. And Sauron goes from being like the chief defender of the world against Sauron to actually ends up working with him later and has to be replaced, right? Gandalf has to go and break his staff at the end of the Lord of the Rings. Spoiler alert. Not really though, because it's, 80 years old or whatever.
Because get with it, y'all. Those movies are like 20 years old.
Yeah, actually, the first Lord of the Rings movie came out 20 years ago yesterday, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, I saw something on the social medias.
I don't feel old or mortal right now.
Nope, just cold and alone.
Yeah. Yeah. The oldness and mortality, no. Just cold and alone. Just very, very alone. Yeah. I cannot emphasize how alone I feel right now.
Oh, that's funny. But I think Sauron becomes like this interesting, or Sauron becomes this interesting sort of counterexample, right? And like the witness of the saints, right? We are called to be obsessed with Christ. We are not called to be obsessed with the darkness or the demons or whatever it is. Like it skews us after a while if that's where our attention is constantly turned towards. And this is where I think like the combative Christianity that Mars Hill began to represent, right? Actually, like again, it internalized some of the excesses of terrible corporate structure or sort of the sort of abuse that you don't want to see in the church, because like, I don't know, if it's constantly focused on broken things, not for the sake of healing, but for the sake of obsession, like you begin to internalize that brokenness, right? It changes your ethos.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's a question for you. Mm-hmm. So beyond the just like anti-Protestantism kind of stuff, right? Like, I mean, because the Mars Hill stuff, I think like does get really stuck in this kind of like culture war thing, right? Like always like, he's like, wow, Seattle's this godless place and there's more dogs than children. And like, the one thing that here's the thing that I will credit Driscoll with is that he stayed there.
Yes.
Right. And he was like, okay, so this is a godless place and there's more dogs than children and rah, rah, rah. But it was like, rah, rah, rah. Right. Let's turn the tables on this. Like, let's make this different than what it is. Right. Because I feel like he very easily could have just been like, screw it. Like, let's go somewhere else where we can continue to grow and be bigger and better. But he was like, dude, if there's one place that needs the gospel, it's Seattle.
Yeah.
So like to that end, my hat is off to Mark Driscoll.
Totally.
Whether or not it actually, played out that way is different, but like at least that was part of the conversation that was being had. And of course, even when we use like the words like culture wars and whatever, there's this kind of like militancy that kind of gets brought up, right? And there's this us them again, kind of like it just easily becomes like the anti the other guy kind of thing, rather than like, well, what are you for, right? So my question for you, Stephen, is also, I don't know your middle name. I will have to talk about that offline, but I just realized that I don't know your middle name because I was going to call you by your full name, but maybe you don't want me to do that. That's fine. But my question,
can't have that power over me.
Yeah, no. Oh, wow. It's like you went just like name of the wind on me.
Mm-hmm.
But the question that I have for you is, are there ways that we as Orthodox fall into these same kind of culture war mentalities?
Yes.
That you've seen?
Yes. Yeah, 100%. 100%. I mean, this is the whole sort of like the ministry thinking that we've been talking about for many, many years. Like anytime we see, that secular two mentality that we talk about, like the secular forces are on the outside, we are sort of keeping them at bay, or we need to retreat from them. Like this begins again to like internalize some of that culture war stuff, right? Our initial posture is not repentance. Our initial posture is sort of like pointing a finger and blaming the outside world. and picking a fight or whatever it is. That's kind of like the meta commentary. But I'll give you kind of like maybe like a concrete example of this, which we came across recently that I think is kind of an interesting thing to maybe chew on. So there is one of the seminaries in here in the church in the United States, St. Vladimir's, is planning on moving. Which, I mean, makes sense. I read the press release and they're like, because of economics, because of whatever, like, I think we need to kind of move somewhere else where we can actually, like, we don't have it's cheaper for us to build a new campus than to renovate our old campus. Like, I get it. Like the press release itself was very whatever. But some of the responses to this have, instead of being kind of like pragmatic and dispassionate, have actually kind of fed into this kind of like culture wars thing. Like, because St. Vladimir's right now is very close to where I am in New York, just north of New York City. And like the idea is like New York is this godless wasteland, right? Like, Christianity is growing in the South, therefore it needs to go into the South. And it's like, I'm not sure that that's true, right? Because like Tim Keller has built like a very successful, very faithful Christian congregation in like the middle of Times Square. Right. So like somebody tell Tim Keller that Christianity isn't, somebody tell some of the faithful Orthodox churches, here in the New York area that they're not growing. But like, I don't know, that's like escapism. It's cowardice. It's like this really annoying sort of us versus them. Those are the bad guys. We're the good guys. Like this still happens in the church. Like it's very counterproductive and lazy and frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think there's probably something to like if Driscoll, if Driscoll had been one of us, what if Mark were one of us?
Just a what?
Just an Orthodox Christian like one of us. He probably would have seen this as like, well, then we need to stay in the Northeast. Like if there's a place that needs, and I think we talked about this a little bit last time, even with Bonhoeffer. I can't remember if it came up in our last. I know it's come up at some point. Maybe it was the We Are Orthodoxy episode we did. But Bonhoeffer, when he was, trying to figure out whether he wanted to stay in the United States and teach seminary or go back and be a pastor to the church in Germany, people were like, "Well, the church in Germany is like so corrupt, dude. Like, you like that's whatever." He's like, "Great, that's where I need to go then." Yeah. There was this sense of like, if there's corruption in darkness somewhere, that's actually probably the place I'm being called, to go into Hades instead of to run away from it and go somewhere else, and there's certainly been some commentary that's kind of come about this, right? That the idea that that the future for American Orthodoxy is in the South because that is the region of the country that is the most open to the gospel. That's not to say that like don't go to the South, but I'm pretty sure weren't we told to like go into all nations?
Yeah,
Judea, Samaria, and all the ends of the earth, et cetera, and to be witnesses. I don't know. I mean, it's tough. It's a tough thing to kind of navigate when I feel like, this church that I love being conscripted into some of these narratives, right? Of like of the culture war. I mean, I just don't know what to do about it. Yeah. So there's that.
I don't know either, right? And like, so this, maybe we can even sort of be a little bit more like push into this a little bit. Like, what are the consequences of this like culture war sort of negative thinking? Like, this is something we've kind of like reflected on in private. Maybe it's worth sort of saying out loud. Sometimes I hear Orthodox Christians like morally reason through something, right? And I'm like, man, like that is kind of like, that sounds just so evangelical or sounds just so whatever, right? Like this is not something that is coming, I think, from kind of like the mind of Christ. It is something that is coming from like a left wing or a right wing or a partisan or whatever sort of like, but it's not the mind of Christ, right? I don't think it's kind of engaging the world in a spirit of sort of mission and joy and so forth. It's engaging the world from a position of like ideology or scarcity or whatever. It's just like, and it's weird because I think like, again, the more that we focus on things that are not Christ, the more that actually like internalizes us. And I think what we're seeing over the last couple of years in particular, where like, I'm going to blame the internet again, because I think the internet is a big part of this. Like the internet is designed, right? The internet is designed for engagement. What are the things that, as we've seen from the Facebook papers that came out, what are the things that tend to get the most engagement? Things that make us angry and things that make us scared, things that make us outraged, right? Negative reactions tend to have the most engagement. So the algorithm begins feeding us stuff that makes us angry, scared, whatever it is. We focus on things more and more that make us angry, scared, and that changes us, like from the dopamine that, or from the cortisol that is like pumping through our blood as a just sort of like a physical response to this stress. Right? It changes us, and I think it's changing the way that we think about problems. It's turning opportunities into challenges, into barriers. It's turning brothers and sisters into strangers, into enemies. Like we're beginning to conceive of the world in not Christian ways, because I think we're so obsessed with not Christ that, like it's that whole sort of, we're in the world, but not of the world. Like we're very much of the world.
Yeah.
When our attention is constantly on the things that we oppose in the world.
Yes. Yeah. There's been one like thing that, that like Jesus talks about, and that Paul and the apostles, they talk about like the freeing of captives. Right. And like, there's been this really interesting thing that just kind of keeps coming to mind, is that like the freeing of captives is something that is actually rejoiced in. Right.
Yeah.
Throughout the gospels, and like, I mean, even in the kingdom, for lack of a better word, politics, right? And the kingdom of God politics, like the prisoners are set free. Right. I mean, think about Jesus when he reads in Luke, right? Like, I come to, bring good news to the poor, to free the captives, to raise the dead, all these different kinds of things, right? Like, and he's truly, this word is fulfilled in your hearing today. But it seems to me that there's this almost rejoicing now in the captivity of others who don't get it. And that to me is just, it's tough. It's a tough thing to live with, like, well, those are the people who don't get it, and so we need to go to places where people are gonna get it. And I get that there's like this idea of like shaking the dust off your feet if people aren't receptive to you, but that's not what Jesus did. Like he died for those people.
Yeah.
He wasn't like, well, y'all don't get it.
Yeah.
Y'all are hard-hearted and whatever, but he goes to the cross. He gives his life for the sake of those who don't get it.
And I think, right, like this is why I think it's become kind of like an imminent partisan thing, because I think the same impulse that causes like the cancel culture mob to be like, this person is irredeemable and must be destroyed, and there's no repentance, right? Like this, like whatever, like there's no whatever. That's the same impulse I think behind, we need to sort of like flee these godless sort of outposts and move somewhere more godly and so forth. Like it's the same thing, right? Like the sort of like the progressive and the reactionary are both grounded in this world. One is like consciously advancing the cause of this world. The other one is like reacting against it, but it remains the frame of reference of both. Like they are both sort of like locked into immanence in ways that especially the reactionary, I think, because the reactionary can sometimes like sort of have a veneer of religiosity. Although I guess the progressive can as well, right? But they're both grounded in immanence. Like it's the same instinct, to demonize, to flee. Like it's the same instinct. This person, this place is irredeemable, as opposed to like what is, like you look at the icon of the resurrection, right? Christ is standing upon the doors of Hades because he has kicked them in. This is it's a sermon that I gave when I was up at seminary in early November. And we did a B2B episode about this years and years ago. So we've talked about this before. We talk about in Matthew 16, like the gates of hell shall not prevail, and how gates have become these defensive things in our mind, right? Like the church has put gates around it, and the gates of hell somehow shall not prevail against our gates, right? Hell is on the offensive, evil is on the offensive, and we are defending ourselves and cowering against this. But that's not what gates are, right? Gates are the doors in a wall, right? Like gates don't move. Gates are defensive fortifications, not offensive fortifications. So if the gates of hell shall not prevail against us, it's not that hell is on the offensive. Hell is on the defensive because Christ went into hell, when he died. He kicked the gates of hell down and he went in and he loosed the captives who were there. Like that is our call as Christians, right? Like there's darkness, like you said. What does light do? Light cannot touch the darkness without dissolving it. Light does not cower in the face of darkness. Light does not say there's too much darkness for me. A single photon is enough to dissolve the light in a room, right? A single ray of light. Imagine in the middle of the night, like there's a light post outside or whatever it is, like through the slat in the curtains, it disturbs all of the dark, like a single ray of light. And yet, for whatever reason, because we've internalized these lessons of immanence, like we put up these walls, we put up these things, like that's too much darkness for us, can't deal with it, whatever it is. Like it's just backwards. It's all backwards. And I'm ranting right now.
No, you're not, because I think it matters, right? Because like this is like what the culture war thing kind of ends up being about, right? Is it's like we're the ones who have the light, they're the ones who have the dark, and so we need to preserve our light by staying out of the dark, right? So bear with me, I'm trying to put these thoughts together, right?
Sure.
Because I feel like sometimes the best that we can do in the church, in Christianity at large, Orthodoxy specific, whatever, is kind of like continue to point to life after death. Like we kind of keep looking to like what happens after we die. And so we kind of have to like just put up with like the pain of this world and whatever, but like really what matters is where we go when we die. So we just got to kind of hang in there, right? And the larger mission of our lives is about preserving that light that we've been given. And to be fair, I think like the mission of the church is this kind of come and see, right? Like I mean this is a thing that when I was becoming Orthodox anyway, like it was the kind of like the catchphrase, right? Of like, if you like about Orthodoxy, it was like, come and see, come and see, come and see, come and see, come and see. But I think equally important to that is the go and do likewise.
Yes.
And that's the part that I don't think that I hear enough of when we get into these culture wars, right? Like the culture war thing is all about come and see. Retreat, run away, whatever, like preserve the light, whatever. But this faith that we have is mysteriological in its essence. It's not imminent. So what if, when we leave the doors of the church, and this is something we talk about a lot, what if our entire lives were meant to be a witness to what we've already tasted? What would it mean if we were to be the kinds of people who are less concerned with power, possession, and prestige, and we're more oriented towards lives of sacrifice and generosity? What would that mean for the way that we engage a world that we see is in darkness? I heard this sermon recently about how the church was supposed to engage the world during a fast, and it was just an incredible sermon. The priest basically suggested that increased prayer, fasting, and church attendance are really, really good. Right? Like, yes, yep, do it, do that. And like that doesn't do it for the world though. Right? It's good that you're praying, it's good that you're fasting, it's good that you're coming to church. And yes, that creates this kind of change in you. And so to that end, right, like you bring the light into the world. However, like what the world needs to see is us manifesting that kingdom that we taste of through prayer, fasting, and church attendance, through our giving to one another, to giving to those in need, to caring for the afflicted, to going into places of darkness, right? The way that we manifest the kingdom in the world is not through just by going to church or saying prayers and fasting, because they do change us, but the way that we manifest that change is by giving away all of our power, possession, and prestige as if that victory were already won. And it was very compelling to me. It was a very, very compelling sermon, right? Like, what are you holding on to? Why do you need to hold on to power, possession, and prestige? The war is already won.
Yeah.
You don't need to hold on to it anymore.
Yeah.
And that's the witness of the Christian, who goes into the world without the need to establish our own kingdom, because we've already seen that that the story has been written. Yeah. We've tasted of the end.
So this actually is now helping me even to sort of like maybe use different words to think about that sort of like that secular to subtraction story, right? That kind of like that sense that we have these sacred spaces, the secular is on the outside, we're in the middle of this war. Like what that really is, right? The posture of like we're in the war as opposed to the war has already been done is that what it's funny, like it is trying to demonstrate sort of like a defense of Christ, but what it actually is like manifesting is a lack of faith in him, right? Like it is as if the more faithful thing for the martyr to do would be to pick up a sword and kill as many Roman guards as possible, instead of just sort of like laying down his life, right? And kind of like just going to the lions in peace, right? As if like the thing that St. Ignatius of Antioch, who we're celebrating today, actually on the 30th, right? Today's St. Ignatius, I think.
I think tomorrow.
Tomorrow? Oh, I thought it was today. I could be
Maybe
wrong.
it is today.
I thought it was today. But anyway, St. Ignatius of Antioch, he willingly, like people were telling him like, you don't have to go to Rome. You don't have to be martyred. And he's like, no, I am going. It's today. Okay. He's sorry. May we have his prayers. He went to Rome, right? He's like, I'm not going to be jailbroken. I'm not going to be sort of like liberated from this. I'm going to Rome, right? To my death, to be wheat that is going to be ground up in the mouths of the beasts, to be off. So I can be offered as this perfect sacrifice, right? This perfectly baked loaf, right? Using Eucharistic language to talk about the way that he was going to offer himself. But I think sometimes like in the culture war sort of mindset, what he should have done is like picked up a sword and killed as many sort of pagan Romans as possible, right? As if like that would have been the better thing for him to do, because they're dangerous. Like the ethos of martyrdom, the ethos of turn the other cheek, the ethos of all these things, like they don't jive with the culture war. Like turning the other cheek only makes sense if you believe that Christ has won and Christ is risen.
So this might be I don't know if this is a weird way to think about it. Like I almost think of this as like Juneteenth. Like this thing that was kind of the like established, right, in 2021 as a federal holiday. So the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, I think, in January of 1863.
Yeah.
Does that sound right? That feels right to me.
Sure.
It wasn't until June 1865 that federal troops arrived in Galveston, Texas, to let all of the white and black people know that the black folks had been freed from slavery
2 years ago.
2 years prior. So there were already like losses that happened in this whole kind of thing, right? Like many people had kind of died under this, but it was like to ensure this idea of like, look, y'all have been free for 2 years, and so we're here to make sure that that's kind of the thing that's actually happening here. And I sort of feel like maybe the liturgy is like a constant Juneteenth for Christians, right? Y'all are free. Y'all are already free. You've been living like slaves for the last couple of years. Whatever. But you're free. You're already free. Yeah. You've been freed. Now go live like it. Now go live like you're free from like the climate of this world, from power, possession, prestige. Like go live that way. Go be who you actually already are.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's an okay analogy, but that's kind of what's like striking my.
I like this image a lot. I like this image a lot. And I think it's an interesting gloss on the reason why the liturgy in particular doesn't change, right? And I think from a pedagogical point of view, right, the liturgy doesn't change because of its posture in eternity, right? The only thing that really changes in the liturgy is the hymn of the day. But otherwise, like the liturgy is the same. Because again, we are participating in this like eternity. And like, but we have to be formed into eternity, right? We have to be sort of like broken out of the temporalness that shackles us. We have to be, shackles, chains, right? We have to be broken out of the things that chain us to this life in its broken sense, this world in that broken sense, right? The flesh in that broken sense. And repetition and sort of like, that line in the epistle from a couple of weeks ago where Paul is telling us to like awaken, O sleeper, right? It's almost like we're asleep. We're asleep at the wheel. Like Christ has to come and tell us again and again and again, like, wake up, right? You're free. Wake up. You're free. I like that image a lot. And we've been free for a long time.
Yes. Yeah. Real long time.
but to tie that back to the spiritual abuse, right? I mean, shame on those who make us feel enslaved, right? Shame on those who actually like don't encourage people to see themselves like for what they are, as the temple of the Spirit, to see themselves as children of the living God, right? To see themselves as priests of creation, and to actually grow into that spiritual maturity. But the people who are like the grifters, who treat the people as nothing but a pocketbook for depositing coins in the collection plate, or people to be manipulated, or people to be held in fear, or whatever it might be, like, because we're free. That's beautiful.
Yes.
I find that beautiful.
Yeah, no, I think this is literally the first time that has ever crossed my mind as like, oh, maybe it's like, I don't know, this idea, this like proclamation that like you already have the thing that you've been fighting for. And now
so stop fighting,
and now start doing the things that are actually going to like make it different, right? Because we've been, this is, I keep coming back to like the power of possessions prestige thing, because I feel like when I think about like what are the ways of the world, like that's it, right? And we continue to fight for those things. But if we already realize that war has been won, then we can continue to surrender power. We can continue to surrender possession. We can continue to surrender prestige for the sake of love for one another, right? Like this helps us reclaim the gift of the Eucharist, of Christ's broken body and blood. We can reclaim that as a gift to stoke our missiological imagination. Why are we here? This is why. We've already been freed from power, possession, and prestige by Christ's own act. So like, let's live that way instead of trying to win in the ways of the world, by uprooting from New York and going to somewhere that's going to be more receptive to us. Like, well, I'm only going to talk to the people who like me. Like, man, is that the best we can do?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I've said too much about that, but I don't know. It seems to me
I think
like
it's
it
fair.
could be, yeah.
I think it's fair.
So let's try to wrap this up because we've been going for a while.
Yes.
And I'm going to ask you, Steve.
Okay.
What are the takeaways for us from the Mars Hill? Because we are not going to talk about this ever again, y'all.
Ever? But they're doing bonus episodes.
Y'all. Are they really?
Yeah. That's what they said. Yeah. I'll believe it when I see it, Mike Cosper. I'll believe it when I hear it.
Yeah. And like, they're like, oh, yeah, 2023. Also, that's actually not surprising to me because I feel like I'm not going to say that part. Never mind. Let's keep going.
Okay.
So I'm going to be nice and be like, thank you for your great journalism. So what do you think the takeaways for us as Orthodox Christians are from this podcast?
Yeah, this is a fantastic question. I think one of the takeaways is that we need to be mindful of the ways that we have created communities, structures, whatever it is, that have not served the mission of the gospel, that have not served the upbuilding of the church, but have served some other sort of agenda, right? I mean, I think like from a ministry point of view, we talk about this all the time. Like, is the church leading young people to Christ, or is the church leading young people to like an ethnic identity? Is it leading them to sort of pure participation, right? Like, are we actually sort of creating communities and structures and subgroups, or whatever the language is, that is serving the cause of the kingdom, or that is serving some sort of other cause? And I think there's a lot of room there, not even like beyond just sort of like spiritual abuse, right? Like just spiritual emptiness, right? Are there places where we need to sort of like be careful of that? Number one. Number two, are there ways that we have internalized some of the lessons and values of the world? Like, is the culture baptizing us, or are we baptizing the culture? And here's like a simple example of this, right? Like, I hear this myself too. Like, I sometimes get sort of like labeled as like a celebrity, right? Which I'm like, if I'm doing a retreat or whatever it is, and I tell them like very, very sort of like, we don't use the C word in this house because that's not who we are.
Was recently at a place where you were referred to as the most well-known person in Orthodoxy.
I know. I hated
I was
it.
there and I heard that with my ears. And I thought, probably not. Like, I love Steve. He's certainly one of the best people I know. Perhaps like the best person I know.
You're very
But
but that's
most well known,
objectively
most well
wrong
known in
statement.
Orthodoxy, most well known.
That's an objectively wrong statement. Yeah. But also, like, that's not the
I
point.
don't even know your middle name.
I don't have one.
Oh, what? Really?
Yeah.
Are you, wait, seriously?
Yeah. Officially, I don't have one.
Can we make it Danger?
Well, I've adopted the name Christopher for my dad, but like I can.
My name is
sure.
Stephen Danger Christoforou. Or Trouble. Either one of those.
Middle name.
Yeah.
I like it. I'll get business cards printed. Sure.
Yeah. Stephen Danger Christoforou.
Oh man. That does not suit my personality at all.
Oh. Stephen Dictionary Christoforou.
Yes.
Encyclopedia.
Oh, bingo. That was my childhood in a nutshell.
I'm happy now. I'm
not middle
alone.
school anymore.
I'm not alone anymore.
But I'm still cold.
Oh yeah, that's good. Man. That's good stuff.
Where were we? I don't even remember where we were.
Oh man, I'm sorry. I threw you off. You had been talking about, have we adopted the lessons and the values of the culture? Like, are we baptizing culture, or is it baptizing us?
Because I've thought about this in terms of like the spread of the gospel. Like, America seems like the one country that Christianity has not baptized, but rather has like baptized Christianity. And again, I think that like the danger is there for us as American Orthodox Christians too. Like we've said it before, I'll say it again. One of our challenges that we're going to face and are already facing in the 20th century is the replacement of like old country Orthodoxy for new country Orthodoxy. Like if we go from being Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox and whatever to American Orthodox, that's the same problem because we're just something else before Orthodox Christians. And this is one of our challenges. Like we're Americans before we're Orthodox Christians as we become.
And this is where I think where you were bringing up the point of like celebrity, right? Like celebrity is kind of what we had gotten stuck on, the C word. That like that. Yeah, we don't say that. This to quote I think we've quoted her before, but our friend Elisa Bielatich, who says, Orthodox famous is not famous, is one of my favorite statements of all time, because it's true. Like Orthodox famous is not famous. That's just not famous.
Yeah.
Like we are 1% of the population.
Yeah. 100%.
So if 10% of the 1% know you, then like you're not famous. You're not famous. So here's the question for you though, is do you think that we have our own celebrity figures?
We do 100%. Because again, I think like we're more shaped by the world than we realize. And I think the media has the availability of media has made that easier. Now, are all the celebrity figures like bad or unhelpful? Like, no, 100%. Although I think there's an inherent problem when we think about people as celebrities and give them sort of like unmerited or uncritical sort of cachet, right? Because like nobody should listen to what you or I say just because like we have a platform. You know what I mean? Like Paul tells the people to test the spirits. Like we should be testing the celebrities too. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So what would you say to John listener, who is trying to figure out like how to vet their celebrity figures, how to engage them, how to view them, how to relate to them? You know what I'm saying? Like, because I think one of the big problems with Mars Hill, right, was that Driscoll's platform was so large and there was an inherent like unrelationality behind it. So I don't know, like, because I could see how somebody could listen to, a podcast with any priest and begin feeling like now I have a spiritual father,
Yeah.
to whom I can reach out or whatever, or listen to our stuff or other stuff from other people and just kind of feel like, like these are the people that I want to model my life after or whatever. I mean, like, what would you say to John listener that as they're trying to figure out how to engage these quote celebrities?
Yeah.
Does it make any sense? Like, is there some like category that you can begin to like disqualify people from that realm? Because I feel like there's some very charismatic speakers in Orthodoxy whose voices I think are actually really problematic. So I just wonder about that.
Yeah.
Curious.
No, 100%. The simplest answer that comes to mind is like the icon of the Theotokos, right? Or maybe even sort of like the Thesis icon, which is normally like Christ at the center, flanked by the Theotokos and the Virgin Mary. And normally when you have that posture of icon, both the Theotokos and John the Baptist are pointing towards Christ, pointing away from themselves, in other words, towards Christ, right? And I think you see this especially in the icon of the Theotokos, like she's constantly sort of bringing Christ, pointing people like through herself at best, away from herself towards Christ. So like celebrity becomes a problem. It becomes celebrity when, because like celebrities in the world, right? Their job, their goal is to monetize. Their goal is fame for fame's sake. Their goal is to sort of constantly be pointing people at themselves so their platform can grow. When the celebrity sort of like ends at the celebrity, and it's like, stay in my ecosystem, right? Like, be in my groups, do my things. That's when that becomes like a red flag, right? If the Theotokos ever said like, forget about Jesus for a little bit, just kind of stick with me, that would be a problem. She wouldn't be the Theotokos anymore.
Yeah.
And I think like one of the things that I'm most proud of over the last 8 years, I have to say, is how well I think that we've resisted the urge to sort of make things about us. Like we have always, it's always been about like the local parish community. It's always been about the altar. It's always been about the church. Like you, God bless you, are like totally off the internet and have just sort of like, I'll see you at a Be the Bee retreat and that's it, which I respect the heck out of that. But like, we don't have like fan groups. We don't sort of like encourage people to sort of like engage with us. Like, it's like, look, here's a thing that might be helpful for you. Kind of like a book, right? Like you read a book, listen to a podcast, like a little bit of like food for thought, some encouragement, whatever it is. But like, this is meant to supplement and encourage like your actual spiritual life, which is the time that you spent in front of the icons on your wall. It's time that you spent in front of the icons in your house, in your neighborhood, right? The living people that you're there to love as well. Like, that's what this is about, And if you never listen to another episode of Pop Culture or watch an episode of Be the Bee again, God bless you if you don't need it and are just doing your thing and walking with Christ. Like, I don't care if, right?
Yeah, and it's okay, because at the end of the day, like, we are our most important audience. We just love hearing ourselves talk. So we will keep making the episodes, whether you listen to them or not. So it's really like, we don't really care if you listen, because we're having a great time.
That's kind of true.
Yeah, there is definitely a little bit of truth to that. I'll say it's not true.
Yes, that's fair. That's generous. It's not true.
Yeah, so I think that's a really helpful idea. Like, is this pointing towards the person who's like standing there doing the thing? And because I think like there is a temptation, right? Like, oh, Father is so amazing. Oh, did you hear that thing that Steve had to say? Oh, what? And it's like, if we leave probably listening to a podcast or listening to or whatever, talking about how great the speaker was, we're probably missing the point, right? Yeah. Like if we walk away from a thing stuck on so-and-so, instead of saying like, wow, so-and-so really showed me Christ, then I've said it before, but we put the emphasis on the wrong syllable.
Yeah.
This is why my campaign that I'm running for bishop on is can I do that? I don't think I can probably do that. I'm not going to. You
actually that. in some traditions you can actually run for bishop.
Oh, can I? So I could like actually put my name on a ballot somehow and be like,
yes.
Vote.
Somebody sent me a job description. Actually, I think like the Armenian diocese was like looking for candidates for their bishop for the episcopacy.
It's 2021, like, ladies. Tell your husbands vote for Gonzalez. Wow, that's amazing. So to be clear, I am not running for the episcopacy and do not envy
If elected,
those jobs
I will not serve.
whatsoever. Yeah, and if elected, I will run away and abandon my family. So it's like and if I abandon my family, that's on you. It's just on you at this point. It's on you.
How dare you?
Yes.
Who do you think you are?
Don't you care about my children? Why do you not care about my children? But this is the platform that I was talking about. This is why I continue to say it. Like, I think when we talk about icons, we need to probably say this is not an icon of Saint Maria, but an icon of Christ in Maria of Paris. Yeah, and the reason I say her is because she's staring here, looking at me. She's my friend. She's probably, by the way, one of the saints that I think we've talked about this before, that I feel this like my friend kinship. Maria, I just love her. I love her. And so I keep her right here on my desk, and she is there always telling me good stuff. So I mean, I think that this is a really important reason that that we need to probably change the way we talk, right? Like, not like Father's whatever was so great, but like the why. Like, why was it great? It was great because it showed me the person of Christ, who is revealed perfectly in the incarnate expression of Jesus of Nazareth, right? Like it continues to kind of hone it in to like where we see it in the face of love himself, right? Like that's got to be the thing. Otherwise, we make it about ourselves, and it's just dangerous. It's just a dangerous game to get in. So here's maybe my final question for you, because I think there's so many questions, but we've gone for so long, and even in this particular part 2, we went way longer than we thought we were going to.
We did,
which is fine, because this is such an important podcast that, again, I sort of feel like we need to make seminarians listen to, because I do think there's an element of like how we form our clergy is really important, right? Like part of the thing with Driscoll was that he didn't know who he was. And he had no sense of awareness of how he would be tempted to respond when he was questioned. So I do feel like there's some level of like how do we actively form the clergy of our parishes well enough to deconstruct these problematic structures that enable such authoritarianism, right? Like that is one thing. So that could be a conversation unto itself at some point, I'm sure, whether through like ECM stuff, but I don't want to get into that on this one, but I do want to at least plant the seed of that being an important conversation. So my question to you is, how do we begin this work of, like, for lack of a better word, reconciliation in our parishes, recognizing I do think that some of the same problems that have happened at Mars Hill, and I think the reason this podcast took off with such resonance is because so many people have experienced the same kind of stuff. Right? Have they been hurt in similar ways? So my question is, how do we begin to do that work of reconciliation and healing with people in our parishes who have been hurt through similar situations?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And to connect a couple of dots, like, I mean, I think it's something that we saw even in the conversations that you had with people in like We Are Orthodoxy. Like, sometimes there were times, right, when some kind of interaction with a parish leader was a stress point for a young adult in like their walk with Christ. This is hard, right? And this is a question that's actually come up a lot lately. Like, how do we do this? This is something that, so our friend Katrina Bitar and I were doing like a Yes series, Youth Equipped to Serve, like in the weeks of Advent. We just finished last Tuesday, the last one, the 5th one. And one of the things that kind of like came up a couple of times was like a similar question of this, like, what do I do when I am feeling alone? What do I do when I am feeling disconnected? What do I do when I am feeling whatever? And kind of the answer that we settled on was that thing that you are lacking, try to be that or offer that for someone else. Like, if you are feeling lonely, you can't control whether someone else is going to welcome you, but you can try to welcome somebody else and extend fellowship to somebody. If you are feeling overlooked, you can't control whether someone else sees you, but you can actually see somebody, right? So I wonder, like, if you are feeling some of these questions, if you are feeling like, you don't have the ability to have some of these conversations, to bring some of this up, try to be that for somebody else. Like be kind of a safe space, be a listening ear, be a friend, right? Like be somebody who can kind of uncritically, without anxiety, sort of listen as another person shares their story. And that is the way I think that positive culture can grow. Like we can't expect somebody else to do it, but we can, to the extent that to the extent that it's within our power, offer that to somebody else. Because if we're lacking it, chances are somebody else is as well. I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer, but
I think that's such a beautiful one, like it's this idea of like, just listening itself as ministry, which is something that I've done, like OCF SLI kind of, OCF Student Leadership Institute, like talks on, just listening itself as a ministry.
Yeah.
Without having to say something. And maybe this is something that could actually be, valuable. So forgive me, I'm going to read from Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Life Together a little bit at length here.
Go for it.
He says,
do you have a reference, by the way, if somebody wants to find it in the book, like what chapter are you in? What page are you on?
Yeah. So it's chapter 4 titled Ministry. This book, y'all, like it is fantastic. It is just a fantastic book that maybe even sometime we could do a whole thing on at some point. But anyway, he says, the first service that one owes to others in the fellowship consists in listening to them. Isn't that beautiful? And then he goes on and says, Christians, especially ministers, so often think that they must always contribute something when they are in the company of others, that this is the one service that they have to render, i.e. like saying that they feel like they have to say something, like they have to contribute something. Yeah. They forget that listening can be a greater service than speaking. Many people are looking for an ear that will listen. They do not find it among Christians because these Christians are talking where they should be listening. But he who can no longer listen to his brother will soon be no longer listening to God either. He will be doing nothing but prattle in the presence of God too. This is the beginning of the death of the spiritual life, and in the end, there is nothing left but spiritual chatter and clerical condescension arrayed in pious words.
That's
anyone
powerful.
Who thinks that his time is too valuable to spend keeping quiet will eventually have no time for God and his brother, but only for himself and for his own follies. Gah.
Bang, bang.
Dietrich with the mic drop. That's why they call him Mic Drop Bonhoeffer.
Is that his rap battle name?
Yeah. Mic Drop Bonhoeffer. Yeah, no, but I think you're totally right. The question for us, I think, has to be, in all of this stuff, right? How do we make room, first of all, simply to listen? Okay, like tell me, because I think there is that like, I want, like, well, but, yeah, but the yeah buts are like crazy,
Yeah.
And that's back to that defensive thing that we talked about last time, right? We constantly want to defend, but it's like, if I can first of all take up the cross by not defending myself or somebody else or somebody, whatever, like my structure that I believe in, instead just hear what you have to say and sit with the pain that you've been through, then that itself becomes a ministry of reconciliation, right? Like, wow, you've been through it. That's tough.
Yeah.
Whether or not so-and-so meant it, whether or not, the impact of what you've experienced is so painful that I'm going to make room to hear that. Like, that's really beautiful and powerful. I think like that is, I mean, that's the cruciform act.
Yeah. Well, Bonhoeffer is very wise, and our friend Katrina is very wise. So yes. It's no surprise that.
Yep.
Yeah. So here we are. I think we're over budget in terms of time. There's more to say, but I think like we should just kind of call it quits again and not commit to a part 3. Just like let this be enough for now.
Yeah. You vultures need to wait forever.
Until Wednesday for the next pop culture.
Yeah, but we're never going to do Mars Hill. We're not even going to say the words Mars Hill ever again.
Oh. Tim will bleep this if it accidentally slips.
Yep.
Yeah.
And just to test him, Mars Hill.
Now, question though, what
Mars Hill,
happens
y'all.
if we what happens if we refer to like Paul visiting Mars Hill in Athens? Is that still bleepable?
Yep.
What happens if we refer to the Areopagus, which means Mars Hill?
Nope. Not
Bleepable.
bleepable. Nope.
Not bleepable.
Not bleepable.
So Mars
Because-
Hill specifically.
Because English is the proto language in this thing. So like that gets English words are far more powerful than any other language. I don't know if you know that. So if you were to say a bad word in English, then it's bad. But if you said it in a different language, it wouldn't be bad because that's culturally diverse.
Ah, okay. Okay. I'm tempted to say a bad word in German right now, but I won't.
Well, German's different because of reasons.
Okay. Oh, fair. Fair.
I mean, every word just sounds mad to me. I don't know.
It's true. It's true.
I'm German. I have German in my blood, so I'm allowed to say that. You can't say that.
That's true. My people fought off the Germans in World War II. That's all.
Yeah. See, you're anti-German, which is like the more you think about the Germans, the more you become like them.
Oh.
That's what I learned from this podcast.
Gosh. This took a turn. Let's wrap this up before we get
And
further.
by that I mean you'll be more punctual.
Oh.
So think about Germans more, y'all.
And then after Christmas, go have some bratwurst or something.
Can I tell a really funny story though, really quick about my German grandfather?
Of course you can.
So my German grandfather, they lived in a small town in New York, very, very small town called Cuba. You can look it up, Cuba, New York. No lie, famous for cheese.
Like a Gooding Jr.
No, like cheese, and Cuba, like Cuba cheese, not Gooding Jr. But legitimately, my German grandfather, and this is the thing to know about Germans, is Germans do very much care about kind of like boundaries and like what's where and whose is whose. So like punctuality is really important for Germans. And my German grandfather, was the only person on his street who had a fence around his home. The only one, because boundaries were just that important. And to this day, it still tickles me to think about. But
so my sense is it wasn't there when he moved in.
Correct.
Then he put it
built
there.
that. He built it. He built it to be like, y'all go over there. This is mine. We can talk over the fence. I mean, and it was a picket fence, so it wasn't like I don't want to see you, but it's just like I just want you to know that this is my property.
Yeah.
So stay off it, and if you're going to visit, be here promptly at 1:00.
Or rather 12:55.
Yes, and then you will wait outside until I let you in at 1:00.
That's so funny.
So, that's the story of Leo. My
God
grandpa
bless Leo.
Yeah. only person with a fence.
I love that. I'm just
I know.
like picturing like driving down the street, like lawn, fence.
Yes.
Lawn.
And that was it. He was the only person with a fence, like on the whole thing.
That's cool.
So, see you Wednesday.
I'm going to go watch Spider-Man now. You watched it last night. I will text you once I'm done.
It good.